I am Mira Rios. When I was 33, my mother-in-law threw my 10-week-old son's crib into the dumpster and locked him in a room reeking of industrial primer. My husband was deployed in the Middle East, and my phone was locked away during an army-based lockdown drill. When I slammed on the brakes in front of my house, the first thing I saw were the splintered wooden slats of the crib sticking up into the sky, crushing the handmade wool blanket that was the only thing I had left of my dead mother. My mother-in-law stood on the porch, hands covered in cheap gray paint, smirking like she'd won a war. She had no idea that the nurse who knocked on the door 3 hours later and the army captain who walked into that house after were there to investigate her. Welcome to Family Honor Stories, where everyday people use ruthless silence and the law to strike back at toxic families instead of screaming. Drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe. Now let's go back to the moment when I still thought pieces of paper were enough to protect my kid. I enlisted at 18 because it was my only ticket out of a dead-end trailer park. 5 in the morning. The perimeter outside is still pitch black. My kitchen smells like burned Folgers. Black. No sugar. I sit alone at the laminate table. The house is dead silent. I hold a cheap blue ballpoint pen, digging the tip into a stack of printed forms. Army Form 5305, Family Care Plan. I press down hard enough to score the wood underneath the paper. I write Sarah Jenkins, not a blood relative, a squad mate's wife. I designate her as the sole temporary guardian of my son. In my world, blood doesn't mean loyalty. Blood just means they know exactly where to slide the knife. I fold the crisp white papers, slide them into a gallon-sized Ziploc bag, and slap it onto the stainless steel fridge with a heavy magnet. Right at eye level. No gray areas, no family favors, just legal boundaries. I take a sip of the bitter coffee and look at the empty space at the head of the dining table. My jaw tightens. Last November, Thanksgiving. I had just come back from a brutal 9-month tour in Iraq, sweating inside 40 pounds of Kevlar, eating dust, saving up every single dime of my hazard pay so David and I could finally put the down payment on this exact house. It was my fortress. Elena hosted the family dinner, here, under my roof. She took my debit card, went to the grocery store, and bought a 20-pound Butterball turkey expensive wine and all the trimmings. When it was time to sit down, the dining room was packed. Every heavy oak chair was taken by her side of the family. Bianca, her cousins, people who had never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. Elena walked into the garage. She dragged out a flimsy white plastic folding chair, the kind you sit on at a cheap tailgate party. She wedged it into the far corner of the room, right next to the kitchen trash can. For me. I sat there in my dress uniform, silent. The plastic legs wobbled under my weight. Elena stood at the head of the table, carving the meat, passing the porcelain plates around, completely bypassing my corner. The good silverware clinked. She caught me looking at her. She didn't look away. She just gave me that sickeningly sweet, tight-lipped smile. It's just a shame, Elena muttered, her voice loud enough to cut straight through the room's chatter. She glanced sideways at my combat boots. Women holding rifles, their kids just end up eating dirt. Absolutely no maternal instinct. Bianca snickered into her wine glass. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I just stabbed my fork into a slice of dry, overcooked white meat and chewed. Surviving a toxic family is exactly like surviving an ambush. You don't scream. You observe. You let them think they have the upper hand. You dig your trench. I push the chair back. The linoleum squeaks under my boots, pulling me back to the present. I walk down the narrow, dark hallway to Leo's room. He's 10 weeks old. Sleeping soundly in the white wooden crib I put together myself. 2 nights fueled by caffeine, working an Allen wrench until my thumbs blistered. I reach out. My rough, calloused fingers brush the edge of a hand-knitted, wheat-colored wool blanket draped over the crib railing. It smells like old yarn and cheap lavender soap. It smells like my mom. She didn't die of old age. She died of a bad cough in a rusted single-wide trailer in Ohio because she didn't have health insurance. This scratchy piece of wool is the only inheritance I ever got. It's the only soft thing I have left in this world. I smooth out a wrinkle on the frayed edge. I tuck it closer to Leo's tiny rising chest. He is my heart. And in a combat zone, you never leave your heart exposed. 9:30 a.m. The motor pool at the base. The air is thick with the heavy stench of diesel fuel and gun oil. We are prepping for a full-scale lockdown drill. Nobody leaves, nobody communicates. The base becomes an island. I'm tightening the Velcro straps on my tactical vest when my phone vibrates deep inside my camo cargo pocket. A text message, Elena. Coming over to help with the baby today. See you later. My neck twitches. The muscles at the base of my skull pull tight, hot, and fast. She doesn't come over to help. She comes over to mark her territory. David is 5,000 miles away in a sandbox, so she thinks the perimeter is unguarded. My thumbs hit the glass screen, firing a text to Sarah. Elena is inbound. Do not let her inside. Keep the deadbolts locked. Point to the paper on the fridge if she starts screaming. Sarah replies 3 seconds later. Copy that. Doors are locked. Overhead, the base sirens start to wail. A long, bone-rattling mechanical scream that vibrates through the concrete floor. The drill is live. Phones off. Lock 'em up. The first sergeant barks, walking down the long row of gray steel lockers. I look at the cracked screen of my phone one last time. I don't just power it down. I pop the back plastic cover off. I rip the lithium battery out. I toss both pieces onto the cold metal shelf. I grab the heavy steel door. I slam it shut. Clack. The padlock snaps into place. The sound echoes through the empty bay. I am completely cut off from the outside world. The 120-minute blind spot has officially begun. While my phone sat dead in a steel locker, my front yard became a drop zone. 10 o'clock. The heavy crunch of rubber tires digging into driveway gravel. Inside the house, Sarah was standing by the kitchen island, testing the temperature of a milk bottle on the inside of her wrist. The house was quiet, peaceful. Then the truck engine cut off with a sputtering choke. Heavy doors slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the glass in the front windows. Sarah set the bottle down. She moved to the living room window, pulling the blinds back an inch. A rusted Ford F-150. Elena's truck. Sarah walked to the front door and checked the deadbolt. Locked, exactly the way I ordered. But Sarah didn't know about the spare key. David gave it to his mother right before his boots hit the sand in the Middle East. Just in case of an emergency, he had told me. He thought he was being a good son. He didn't realize he was handing over the launch codes to a hostile force. Jingle, clack. The deadbolt turned from the outside. The heavy oak door swung open, hitting the drywall with a dull, hollow thud. Elena stepped right into my foyer. She didn't bother to wipe her boots. Clumps of damp brown yard mud stamped directly onto the clean laminate floor I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees. The heavy, suffocating scent of cheap drugstore vanilla perfume flooded the room instantly, choking out the warm smell of baby formula. Sarah stepped squarely into the hallway, using her body to block the path to the nursery. You can't be in here. Mira said no visitors today. I don't give a damn what that girl says, Elena snapped. She jerked her chin up, chest puffed out in that classic stance of unearned authority. She pointed a manicured finger hard at the floorboards. This is my son's house. It has the Rio's name on the mortgage. You are a hired stranger. Get the hell out of my way. Right behind her, Bianca marched in. She already had her phone out, held up at eye level. The red recording light was blinking. Just documenting the rescue, Bianca muttered to the camera, panning the lens over the living room, faking a tone of deep concern. Getting my nephew away from a deadbeat mother who abandons him with randoms while she plays soldier. Sarah didn't flinch. She was an army wife. She didn't deal in drama. She dealt in protocol. She pointed a stiff finger toward the stainless steel fridge. Look at the paper. I am the designated legal guardian. Army Form 5305. It's a federal document. Elena didn't even pause. She marched right past Sarah, her muddy boots leaving a filthy trail across my rug. She didn't bother to read the black ink on the form. She grabbed the plastic Ziploc bag and ripped it right off the fridge door. Rip! She crumpled the heavy paper in her fist, crushing my signature, crushing my boundaries. She tossed it straight into the garbage can under the sink. Army forms don't mean spit in my family, Elena spat. Blood dictates the rules here. In the back bedroom, Leo started to scream. It wasn't a fuss. It was a high-pitched, terrified wail. The sudden violent shouting had startled him out of his sleep. Sarah's muscles coiled tight. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. She took a half step forward. Her instinct was to physically shove Elena backward out the front door. But Sarah knew the rules of engagement. You do not initiate a physical altercation in a confined space with a 10-week-old infant in the crossfire. Especially not with two unstable hostiles, one of whom is holding a camera, just begging for a reason to call the cops and get Child Protective Services involved. A physical fight would put Leo at risk. Sarah swallowed the bile burning in her throat. She looked at Elena's smug, tight-lipped smile. "I'm texting Mira right now," Sarah said. Her voice was dead flat. "Go ahead." Elena laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Tell her I'm cleaning up her mess." Sarah backed up slowly, one step at a time, never taking her eyes off them. She pulled her phone from her back pocket and typed the SOS text. She hit send. She had no way of knowing the message was just bouncing off the cold, thick steel of my locker at the base, completely unread. Sarah stepped out the front door. She had lost the physical high ground. It makes my blood boil just thinking about it. A mother's ultimate nightmare isn't a stranger breaking in through a window in the dead of night. It's the family member walking through the front door with a key in broad daylight using blood as an excuse to trample everything you built. If you've ever had a toxic family member cross a hard boundary and then play the victim, hit the like button right now. Drop a 1 in the comments if you know exactly how maddening that entitlement feels. We see you, and I promise you, you are not alone. Sarah walked down the concrete driveway to her sedan. Her hand shook from the adrenaline spike as she gripped the steering wheel. She shoved the car into reverse. She looked up into the rearview mirror before pulling out into the street. Elena wasn't going inside to comfort a crying baby. She was standing at the lowered tailgate of her Ford F-150. She hauled a heavy industrial-sized metal bucket out of the truck bed. Sarah rolled her window down an inch. The wind shifted. It didn't smell like cheap vanilla perfume anymore. It smelled like raw ammonia. Chemical solvent, heavy, cheap, toxic industrial wall primer. The kind with warning labels telling you absolutely not to use it indoors without industrial-grade ventilation. Elena kicked my front door wide open, hauling the sloshing gray bucket inside. My perimeter was breached. My son was inside. And the air was about to turn completely toxic. The heavy sloshing bucket of industrial primer hit the laminate floor of the nursery. Elena didn't just cross a boundary. She brought a wrecking ball to it. First, she dealt with Leo. She scooped my 10-week-old son out of his crib. He was screaming, his small chest heaving, his face red from the sudden chaos. She carried him down the hall and dumped him squarely in the middle of the guest bedroom's queen mattress. Any modern American mother knows the rules of safe sleep. Firm mattress. Nothing in the crib. No blankets. No pillows. Flat on the back. It's drilled into our heads from day one to prevent SIDS. Elena didn't care about medical science. She cared about what was convenient. She grabbed 3 oversized heavy feather pillows and jammed them tightly around Leo's small body so he wouldn't roll off the bed. She boxed him in. Then she walked over to the closet and pulled out a rusted, heavy-duty coil space heater. The kind of old garage heater that sucks the moisture right out of the air. She plugged it in, cranked the dial all the way up, and pointed the glowing red coils directly at my son's face. She walked out and pulled the heavy door shut until it clicked. She didn't just leave him unattended. She built an oven, a suffocating, oxygen-deprived trap. Back in the nursery, she popped the lid off the bucket of gray primer. The smell of thick ammonia hit the air immediately. It was the kind of harsh chemical solvent that burns the back of your throat on the first breath. Without opening a single window, she dipped a cheap roller into the bucket. She didn't tape the baseboards. She didn't put down a drop cloth. She just started rolling thick, sloppy strokes of wet gray paint directly over the pastel wallpaper I had spent 3 weeks carefully measuring and pasting by hand. "Help me get this cheap trash out of here," Bianca yelled from the front yard, standing by the open front door. Elena dropped the roller. She walked over to the white wooden crib I had built. She didn't look for the Allen wrench to dismantle it. She grabbed the top rail, planted her muddy boot against the bottom slats, and shoved. Crack! The wood splintered. Screws ripped straight out of the particle board. She kicked it again, tearing the side rail completely off. Bianca dragged the broken pieces down the hallway, the jagged wood scraping deep, permanent gouges into my floor. She threw the 4 white slats out the front door. They tumbled down the concrete steps and landed in the dirt by the curb. Elena stood in the middle of the ruined nursery. Her eyes fell on the crib mattress on the floor. Lying half under it was the wheat-colored wool blanket, my mother's blanket, the only thing I owned that smelled like the woman who raised me. Elena reached down. She pinched the corner of the knitted wool between her thumb and index finger, her hands smeared with wet gray chemical paint. She held it up in the air like she had just found a dead rat in her kitchen. She wrinkled her nose, her upper lip curling in pure disgust. "Smells like white trash," she sneered. She didn't fold it. She didn't set it aside. She balled up the wool, staining it with gray primer, and walked it straight out the front door. She lifted the lid of the heavy green city trash can sitting by the curb and threw my mother's memory inside. Bianca grabbed the splintered, jagged remains of the crib rail and jammed them down into the trash can, crushing the wool blanket under the weight of broken wood and rusted screws. They stood on my porch, breathing in the cold air, completely satisfied with the destruction. They thought they had won. They thought they had established dominance. They forgot about the schedule. At exactly 1:30 in the afternoon, a white sedan pulled up to the curb. It didn't park in the driveway. It parked on the street. Nurse Higgins stepped out of the car. She was a home health visiting nurse assigned by the military hospital for a routine 10-week postpartum wellness check. She wore a blue scrub top and held a thick metal clipboard. She slammed her car door shut and walked up the driveway. Higgins was a veteran nurse, 20 years in the system. She didn't deal in family drama. She dealt in facts, vital signs, and federal law. She stopped at the edge of the driveway. Her eyes didn't go to Elena first. They went to the green trash can. The lid was propped open by the broken, jagged white wood of a baby crib. Peeking out from under the splinters was a wool blanket smeared with wet gray paint. Higgins looked up. Elena was standing on the porch. Her hands were covered in wet primer. Bianca was standing behind her, holding her phone. The front door was wide open. Even from 15 feet away, the heavy, toxic stench of ammonia and chemical solvent rolled out of the house and hit Higgins in the face. "Can I help you?" Elena asked. She crossed her arms, jutting her chin out. "We're busy doing some renovations. The mother isn't here." Higgins didn't answer. She looked at the muddy boot prints tracking from the porch straight through the foyer, disappearing into the hallway. She looked at the paint on Elena's hands. She took another breath of the toxic air pouring out of the house. "Where is the infant?" Higgins asked. Her voice was flat, cold. "Sleeping," Elena said smoothly. "In the back room, with a heater. I'm making sure he's warm while I clean up the mess his mother left." Higgins didn't gasp. She didn't argue. She didn't tell Elena about the dangers of SIDS or chemical inhalation. In the state of North Carolina, a registered nurse is a mandated reporter. That means if she suspects child endangerment, she doesn't negotiate with the family. She goes straight over their heads. Higgins took one step back. She didn't look at Elena anymore. She pulled her cell phone from the pocket of her scrubs. She didn't dial my number. She didn't dial David's number. She looked down at the screen, pressed 3 numbers with her thumb, and put the phone to her ear. "Yes, I need to dispatch an officer and an immediate CPS caseworker to a residence," Higgins said. The machine was finally turned on. 11:30 in the morning. The all-clear siren blasted across the motor pool, a high-pitched mechanical shriek cutting through the heavy North Carolina heat. I stood in front of a long row of dented gray steel lockers. My hands were caked in dry Carolina red clay and slick with CLP gun oil. My combat uniform smelled like diesel exhaust fumes and cheap, stale sweat. I spun the combination dial on my padlock. Clack. I pulled the heavy metal door open. I grabbed the plastic back of my cell phone from the top shelf and slammed the lithium battery into the slot. The screen flickered to life. The cold glass bit into my dirty thumb. Instantly, the phone started buzzing in my palm. It didn't stop. The vibration motor ground against my calluses like a dentist's drill. 47 missed calls, all from Sarah. My chest tightened. I tapped the screen. A single text message loaded. An image file. I stared at the glowing pixels. The background was my own front yard. The subject was the dark green city trash can sitting by the curb. Sticking out of the top, pointing up at the sky like jagged broken bones, were the splintered white wooden slats of Leo's crib. Underneath the broken wood, stained with thick, wet gray sludge, was my mother's wheat-colored wool blanket. A normal mother would drop to her knees. A normal mother would scream or cry or throw the phone against the hard concrete floor. I didn't move a single muscle. The blood drained out of my face, leaving my skin cold and tight. But my hands didn't shake, not a fraction of a millimeter. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford when you are under fire. When an ambush hits, you don't sit in the dirt and cry about the incoming bullets. You locate the shooter. You return fire. I looked at the black grease smeared across my knuckles. I accepted this dirt. I put on this heavy uniform, humped a 60-pound rucksack, and breathed in toxic exhaust fumes just so I could afford a solid roof for my son. I was out here securing a perimeter for my country, and my own mother-in-law was using the spare house key to turn my home into a landfill. Elena wasn't just throwing away baby furniture. She was punishing me for working. She was punishing me for not being a barefoot housewife waiting by the stove, and she was using my 10-week-old son as collateral damage to prove her point. I locked the phone screen. I shoved it deep into my camo cargo pocket. I turned on my heel, my boots hitting the concrete with heavy measured strikes. I didn't run. Running shows panic. I walked with a calculated purpose straight toward the command tent. The heavy canvas flaps were tied back. First Sergeant Miller stood over a folding metal table, stacking drill reports. He was a 50-year-old lifer, a man who had seen real mortars tear through dirt walls in Kandahar. He didn't tolerate excuses, and he didn't give a damn about domestic drama. I stopped right at the edge of his table. I snapped to parade rest, feet shoulder-width apart, hands locked tightly behind my back, spine straight as a steel rod. "Sergeant Rios," he barked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Status." I didn't say a word. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked the screen, and slid it face up across the metal folding table. Miller stopped writing. He looked down at the photo. He looked at the broken crib slats. He looked at the trash can. The heavy silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. The deep lines around Miller's mouth tightened. He had been deployed multiple times. He knew exactly what it looked like when the home front betrayed you while your boots were tied to the base. He picked up the phone and handed it back to me. "Rios." His voice dropped an octave low and gravelly. "Pull your gear." "First Sergeant." "I'll bump the paperwork up to the captain." Miller cut me off, holding up a thick, scarred hand. His eyes were dead serious. "Get off my base. Go handle your rear detachment. Clean it up." "Yes, First Sergeant." 5 minutes later, I was in the cab of my Chevy Colorado, tearing down the 2-lane blacktop toward town. The needle on the speedometer hovered at 80. The tires whined hard against the asphalt. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat and slammed the speakerphone button. Sarah picked up on the first ring. "Mira! Oh my God, Mira, they're inside." I cut her off. I didn't ask if my son was crying. I didn't ask if he was scared. I needed ammunition, not emotion. "Give me timestamps, Sarah," I ordered. My voice was pure ice. What time did her tires hit the gravel?" 10, exactly 10 a.m. "Did she read the Army form 5305? She ripped it off the fridge, threw it in the kitchen trash." "Destruction of a legal document," I muttered. "Who else is on site?" "Bianca. She's recording everything on her phone, trying to build a case that you abandoned Leo." I let out a short, hollow laugh. It sounded like metal scraping metal. "Let her record. What time did the smell start?" "Right before I pulled out. 10:15. Mira, it smelled like heavy industrial primer, pure ammonia. She carried a 5-gallon bucket inside." I didn't reply. I hit the red button on the dash to end the call. My brain started stacking the bricks of a timeline. A prosecutor's dream. 10 a.m., trespassing. 10:15, chemical endangerment of a minor. 11:30, destruction of private property. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles turned stark white against the black leather. The sharp smell of gun oil from my hands filled the cramped cab of the truck. I took the final turn onto my street. The neighborhood was quiet. 2 houses down, I saw Elena's rusted F-150 parked diagonally across my driveway, dripping dark oil onto my clean concrete. I didn't tap the brakes. My Chevy Colorado slammed to a halt. Tires locked. Burning rubber scraped against the asphalt, leaving thick black streaks just inches from the rear bumper of Elena's rusted Ford F-150. I threw the truck into park and ripped the keys from the ignition. The air outside was already tainted. Standing on my own front walkway, I could smell the sharp chemical bite of industrial primer leaking through the cracks of my own house. To my left, over the rusted chain-link fence, my neighbor Martha stood on her overgrown lawn. She had her smartphone gripped in both hands, the camera lens pointed squarely at my porch. Waiting for a show. Waiting for the crazy veteran to snap so she could upload it to her local gossip group. I did not look at her. I did not give her a single frame of hesitation. I took the 3 porch steps in one stride. The front door was pulled shut but not latched. I planted the flat sole of my combat boot right next to the deadbolt and kicked. Hard. The heavy wood swung inward, banging violently against the drywall. A wall of dry, suffocating heat slammed into my face. It felt like standing over an open exhaust vent in the middle of July. The air was thick gray and toxic, pure ammonia and burning dust. It coated the inside of my nose and burned the back of my throat on the very first breath. Leo. I moved through the hallway. My boots crushed paint splatters and drywall dust into the laminate. The nursery was empty. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the guest bedroom. The rusted coil space heater was glowing bright orange in the corner. It was cranked to the absolute maximum, blowing dry, blistering air directly onto the center of the mattress. Leo was buried. Elena had walled him in with 3 massive, heavy down feather pillows. His tiny body was trapped in a sinkhole of thick bedding. His face was beet red. Sweat plastered his thin, dark hair to his skull. His chest hitched in short, jagged spasms. He was not crying anymore. He was just wheezing, choking on the stagnant, overheated air. My stomach dropped, but my hands moved on pure muscle memory. I lunged across the room. I shoved the heavy pillows onto the floor and scooped my son against my chest. His skin was burning hot through his cotton onesie. His tiny fingers grabbed blindly at the rough, dirt-stained fabric of my camo uniform. I turned toward the bedroom windows. They were painted shut years ago. I did not waste time fumbling with the rusted latches. I raised my heavy boot and kicked the center glass pane. The glass shattered outward, raining down into the garden bushes. I kicked the second window pane, clearing the jagged edges from the wooden frame. A sharp, freezing November wind rushed into the room. It cut through the toxic heat like an ice blade. I stood right in front of the broken frame, holding Leo directly in the stream of the cold, clean air. I shielded his eyes with a cupped hand and let the wind flood his lungs. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Leo coughed, a harsh rattling sound. Then he took a deep, clear breath and let out a loud, piercing wail. Only then did my own heart start beating again. "What the hell are you breaking my windows for?" I turned around. Elena stood in the doorway. She held a cheap wooden paint stirrer in her right hand, dripping with thick gray primer. Her boots were tracking wet mud and fresh paint all over the hallway rug. She did not look at the glowing space heater. She did not look at her suffocating, screaming grandson. She looked at the broken glass on the floor. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. A smug, tight-lipped smirk pulled at the corners of her mouth. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the dried mud and gun oil staining my uniform. "Well, look at that," Elena drawled, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Did the girl finally get tired of playing soldier? Did you finally decide to come home and try being a mother for once good? Because I am exhausted cleaning up this trash heap you left behind." A civilian would have lost their mind. A civilian would have dropped the baby, lunged across the room, and wrapped their hands around her throat. They would have screamed until their vocal cords bled. I did none of that. I held Leo tighter against my shoulder. I turned my body fully toward her. I did not raise my voice. I did not shift my weight. I just stared at her. There is a specific kind of silence you learn in a combat zone. It is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of a predator locking onto a target right before pulling the trigger. It is a heavy, crushing atmospheric pressure that sucks the oxygen out of the room. I let that silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The smirk on Elena's face began to crack. Her arms uncrossed. Her eyes darted away from my face, looking at my boots, looking at the wall. The primal animal part of her brain suddenly realized she was locked in a confined space with a trained killer holding her infant child. She swallowed hard. The paint stirrer trembled slightly in her hand. A drop of gray sludge hit the floor. "Step back," I said. My voice was completely flat. No anger, just a terrifying mechanical certainty. "Get away from my son, right now." Elena did not say another word. She took a clumsy, stumbling step backward into the hallway, bumping her shoulder hard against the doorframe to get out of my path. I walked right past her. I did not flinch when our shoulders nearly brushed. I carried Leo through the toxic fumes of the hallway, out the shattered front door, and down the concrete steps. The cold November air hit my face again. I opened the rear door of my truck and strapped Leo securely into his car seat. He was still crying, but his breathing was steady. Before I climbed into the driver's seat, I stopped. I looked at the curb. The Green City trash can was overflowing with broken white wood. Tucked underneath the jagged splinters stained with toxic gray paint was a single patch of wheat-colored wool. I slammed the truck door shut, put the engine in gear, and drove straight toward the pediatric clinic. The stark white fluorescent lights of the pediatric clinic hummed above my head. The air in the examination room smelled like rubbing alcohol and clean latex. His oxygen saturation is at 99%. Heart rate is completely normal. The pediatrician pulled the stethoscope from his ears. He let it hang around his neck. He looked at Leo, who was now fast asleep on the crinkly white paper of the exam table, breathing deeply and evenly. He wasn't exposed long enough to cause chemical burn in the lungs. You got him out just in time. I sat in the hard plastic chair against the wall. I gave a single tight nod. The primal, suffocating fear that had been gripping my spine for the last 2 hours finally let go. The survival phase of the mission was over. Now the retaliation phase began. "Doc," I said, leaning forward, "can I borrow a sheet of paper and a pen?" He handed me a standard medical clipboard and a black ballpoint. I set the clipboard on my knees. I didn't write about my feelings. I didn't write about how much I hated my mother-in-law or how badly I wanted to put my fist through a wall. That kind of emotion gets you nowhere in a courtroom. A judge doesn't care if your feelings are hurt. A judge cares about dates, times, and hard evidence. I started stacking my ammunition. 10:05 a.m. I wrote the numbers in block letters. Hostile took possession of the property. Removed legal guardian Sarah Jenkins under threat. 11:30 a.m. I pressed the pen down hard. Destruction of infant crib. Endangerment via industrial space heater and unventilated chemical primer. 1:30 p.m. Refused entry to a mandated military healthcare provider. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened the photo Sarah had texted me, the one showing the splintered white wood of the crib sticking out of the green trash can. I tapped the property's icon. Image captured 11:32 a.m. A hard, digital timestamp. Undeniable. I forwarded the photo along with the entire call log, showing 47 missed calls from Sarah directly to my personal email. Then I backed it up to 2 separate cloud servers. One thing you learn quickly in the military: if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. I stared at the piece of paper. It is a sickening, bitter pill to swallow when you realize the people who share your blood or your husband's blood are the ones actively trying to destroy you. Meanwhile, the people who actually protect you are strangers in uniforms and scrubs. The system trusted me. My own family tried to bury me. At exactly 2 o'clock, my phone screen lit up. Ting. A sharp, high-pitched email notification. I opened the federal inbox. It was an automated alert from Child Protective Services cross-referenced with the military network. Nurse Higgins had filed a Priority 1 child endangerment report. Elena thought she was untouchable because she had a spare house key and the title of Grandma. She didn't realize that the second Higgins made that phone call, a massive, unfeeling federal machine woke up. And because I was an active duty soldier, the civilian CPS system automatically flagged the file and kicked it straight over to the Army Family Advocacy Program. The report didn't go to some random social worker in a cubicle downtown. It went directly to the desk of my commanding officer. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't an email. It was a phone call. Captain Vance. I accepted the call and lifted the phone to my ear. Sergeant Rios. I have the report, Rios, Captain Vance said. His voice was a low, steady rumble over the speaker. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded like a man reviewing a tactical map. Nurse Higgins filed a full statement. She documented the chemical odor, the destruction of property, and the hostility of your mother-in-law. Yes, sir. I have Leo at the clinic now. He's cleared. Good. Vance paused. I could hear the faint click of a pen in his office. Listen to me, Sergeant. Your record is the cleanest in this entire battalion. You have 0 disciplinary actions. You have a solid family care plan on file. You hold the line. Understood, sir. Do not engage with the hostile. Do not scream. Do not argue. The Army is stepping in. Let the paperwork speak. Yes, sir. I hung up the phone. I looked down at the clipboard in my lap. The timeline was perfect. The evidence was secured. The trap was set. Right at that exact second, a text bubble popped up on my screen. It was from Elena. I already called the authorities on you. They are on their way. Get ready to lose your kid. I read the gray text box twice. She actually did it. She tried to weaponize the system against me. She thought she could play the victim cry to the cops and use my military service as proof that I was an absent mother. She thought the system would take her side. She had no idea she had just slipped her own neck into a federal noose. If you have ever had a toxic family member try to turn the tables and play the victim after they attacked you, hit that like button. Drop a paper trail in the comments if you know that keeping the receipts is the only way to win. I didn't reply to her text. I didn't send a single angry emoji. I just locked the screen. The glass went completely black, reflecting my face under the harsh fluorescent lights. A slow, cold smirk pulled at the corner of my mouth. I picked up the sleeping baby, grabbed my clipboard, and walked out of the clinic to watch her burn. 10 o'clock, Monday morning. The air inside my living room was dead. 3 days had passed since the incident. The smell of ammonia was gone, replaced by the suffocating tension of an impending execution. A sharp knock hit the front door. 3 quick raps. Before I could move, Elena lunged off the sofa. She practically sprinted across my laminate floor, throwing the heavy oak door open like she owned the hinges. "Oh, thank God you're here," Elena gasped. Her voice was pitched an octave higher than normal. Pure, unfiltered melodrama. A woman stood on the porch. Black slacks, gray blazer, a heavy lanyard hanging around her neck with a state-issued ID card. Agent Chen, Child Protective Services. Chen stepped inside. She didn't smile. She pulled a thick legal pad from her leather tote bag and clicked her pen. Elena immediately launched into her routine. She grabbed Chen's forearm, a gesture of fake, desperate intimacy. "I am just so glad the state finally listens. I had to physically break in here on Friday to save my grandson. This place was a disaster zone. The mother abandons him with complete strangers so she can go play soldier." I stood in the far corner of the room. Black t-shirt, faded denim jeans, combat boots. Leo was strapped to my chest in a fabric carrier, completely sound asleep. I didn't say a word. I didn't defend myself. Through the front window, I could see Martha standing on the sidewalk. Her smartphone was pressed right up against the glass, the red recording light glaring. Bianca stood behind Elena, nodding aggressively, arms crossed. The whole amateur theater troupe was here, ready to nail me to a cross and broadcast it to the neighborhood. "She leaves him in filth." Elena continued, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "She doesn't have a maternal bone in her body. I had to throw out the baby's bed because it was so cheap and broken. I bought the paint. I bought the heater. I tried to clean her mess and she attacked me." Any normal person would have snapped. They would have yelled, "Liar." They would have tried to explain themselves to the social worker. I just rubbed circles into Leo's small back. My silence wasn't submission. It was the silence of a sniper watching a target wander straight into a tripwire. Agent Chen let Elena talk. She let her spin the web. Chen's pen scratched across the yellow legal pad, documenting every single word. The louder Elena got, the more confident she became. She thought the silence meant I was beaten. She thought my lack of tears meant I was guilty. After 5 uninterrupted minutes of character assassination, Elena finally stopped to take a breath. Agent Chen stopped writing. She looked at the pad, then looked across the room. Her eyes locked onto mine. "Sergeant Rios," Chen said, her voice completely stripped of emotion. "Do you have a statement regarding these allegations?" I stepped forward. The heavy rubber soles of my boots hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. I stopped at the glass coffee table in the center of the room. I didn't open my mouth. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a thick, clear plastic binder. Smack! I dropped it flat onto the glass. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot. "Everything is in there," I said. Chen stepped forward. She didn't look at Elena. She opened the binder. Page 1. The hard copy of Army Form 5305. The Family Care Plan. Signed, dated, and notarized. Proving Sarah Jenkins was the legal authorized guardian of my son on Friday morning. Page 2. The photo of the splintered white crib sticking out of the trash can with the gray-stained wool blanket underneath, printed in high-definition color, with a bold digital timestamp in the bottom right corner, 11:32 a.m. Page 3. The Pediatric Medical Clearance Report, signed by an active-duty military physician, citing suspected chemical inhalation and dangerous thermal exposure due to an unventilated space heater. Page 4. The sworn signed affidavit from Nurse Higgins. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in 5 seconds. I watched Elena's face. She was trying to read the papers upside down through the glass table. Her brow furrowed. The smug, tight-lipped smirk started to slip. She didn't know what a timestamp was. She didn't understand that federal forms leave paper trails. Agent Chen flipped to the 5th page, the timeline. She stopped reading. She slowly took her reading glasses off and let them hang from the chain around her neck. She turned her head. She didn't look at me. She looked directly at Elena. "Mrs. Rios," Chen said. The bureaucratic politeness was completely gone from her voice. Elena swallowed hard. "Yes?" According to this documented timeline and the sworn statement of a mandated federal healthcare provider, you forcibly removed the child's legal guardian from the premises. She was a stranger. You then destroyed the child's safe sleep environment at 11:30 in the morning, placing the remains in a city waste receptacle. Chen tapped the glossy photograph with a stiff finger. You then placed a 10-week-old infant in an unventilated room with industrial-grade chemical primer and a direct heat source, creating an immediate risk of sudden infant death syndrome. Elena's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And finally, Chen continued, her voice turning to ice. You actively refused entry to a military visiting nurse who was dispatched to check on the infant's welfare. Bianca took a slow step backward toward the front door. Martha lowered her phone on the other side of the glass. Elena stared at the plastic binder. The color drained from her face, leaving her cheap foundation looking like a pale, cracked mask. Her hands started to shake. Do you dispute this physical evidence, Mrs. Rios? Chen asked. Elena opened her mouth to speak. But before she could formulate a single lie, the heavy, aggressive roar of a massive V8 engine tore through the quiet street outside. Tires locked up. Heavy rubber dragged across the asphalt, stopping dead center in front of my driveway. The heavy, aggressive roar of a massive V8 engine tore through the quiet street outside. Tires locked up. Heavy rubber dragged across the asphalt, stopping dead center in front of my driveway. Elena jumped at the noise, snapping her mouth shut. She had been completely cornered by Agent Chen's physical evidence, choking on her own manufactured lies. But the sound of the vehicle offered her a sudden, desperate lifeline. Through the open front door, a matte black Chevrolet Tahoe SUV idled on the curb. Official U.S. government plates. A man stepped out of the driver's side. He didn't walk. He marched. He was 6'2", wearing a pristine, pressed Class A Army green uniform. The sharp, polished brass on his lapels caught the morning light. On his left chest, stacked 3 rows high, were the heavy, colorful ribbons of multiple combat deployments. Captain Vance. Elena's eyes went wide. A manic, triumphant grin split her face, completely replacing the pale panic from 3 seconds ago. In her twisted, narcissistic reality, she actually believed her text messages had worked. She thought she had successfully weaponized the authorities against me. She lunged toward the open front door, shoving past Agent Chen. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger straight at me. "You see that?" Elena shrieked, her voice echoing out into the yard so Martha's camera could catch every word. "I told you the army is here. They finally figured out what a worthless piece of trash she is. They're here to arrest her and take the baby." Bianca leaned out from behind Elena, smirking, her phone still recording. Captain Vance stepped up onto the porch. He didn't look at Martha. He didn't look at Bianca. And he completely ignored Elena's outstretched finger, pointing right in my face. He walked into my living room. His heavy leather dress shoes hit the laminate floor with a sharp, commanding crack. He walked right past Elena, completely dismissing her existence, and stopped dead center in the middle of the room facing me. He planted his feet. His back was rigidly straight, shoulders squared. He raised his right hand, keeping his fingers perfectly flat and tight. He brought the edge of his index finger sharply to the brim of his brow, a textbook, razor-sharp military salute. "Good morning, Sergeant Rios," Captain Vance said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated off the drywall. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I shifted Leo's weight slightly to my left arm, resting him against my hip. I stood up perfectly straight. I locked my knees. I raised my right hand and returned the salute, cutting it sharply away. "Good morning, sir." Boom. The entire false reality Elena had built over the last 10 years instantly shattered into a million jagged pieces. She stood frozen by the front door. Her jaw dropped open. The triumphant grin melted off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. The blood rushed out of her cheeks. For a decade, she had degraded me. She told her friends I was just playing soldier. She told David I was too rough, too uncultured, too white trash to be a real mother. She used my uniform as an insult. And now a high-ranking combat officer was standing in her son's house saluting that exact same uniform, giving me the ultimate, undeniable mark of respect. "What?" Elena stammered, her voice cracking. "What are you doing? Why are you saluting her? She abandoned her child. She attacked me." She sounded like a drowning rat clawing at the side of a bucket. Captain Vance slowly lowered his hand. He turned his head, his eyes locked onto Elena. There is a specific look a combat commander gives an insurgent. It is completely devoid of empathy. It is the look of a man evaluating a threat and calculating exactly how much force is required to neutralize it. "Ma'am," Vance said. The word sounded like a threat. "I am Captain Vance, United States Army. I am here acting as a liaison for the Family Advocacy Program." "Then do your job and arrest her," Elena screeched, pointing at me again, her finger visibly shaking. "Sergeant Rios has the cleanest service record in this battalion." Vance stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He took one step toward Elena. She instinctively shrank back against the wall. She followed federal protocol. She filed a legal family care plan. She protected her child. The only threat in this room is you. That is a lie. Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You bypassed a military lockdown. You destroyed private property. You placed an infant in a hazardous chemical environment, and you refused entry to a mandated federal healthcare provider. Agent Chen stepped up next to Vance, holding the clear plastic binder tight against her chest. "The physical evidence is overwhelming, Mrs. Rios. The state of North Carolina is officially opening an investigation into child endangerment. And the United States Army," Vance added, his eyes narrowing to cold slits, "is officially placing you on the installation ban list. If you approach Sergeant Rios, her child, or any military property, you will be detained by federal military police." Bianca slowly lowered her cell phone. The red recording light clicked off. She looked at her mother, then looked at the floor, backing away toward the door like a coward. Outside, Martha had already disappeared from the window. The neighborhood gossip show was over. Elena stood alone against the wall. Her chest heaved rapidly. She was hyperventilating. The heavy, cheap vanilla perfume she wore couldn't mask the sudden sour smell of her own fear. She looked at Agent Chen, then at Captain Vance, and finally her eyes landed on me. She realized she was completely surrounded by the system she had tried to use against me. I stood holding my son, looking back at her. I didn't say a single word. I didn't have to. The United States government had just spoken for me. The entire room belonged to me now. I held the absolute power of life and death over Elena's future. With the federal evidence sitting on the glass table, I could have pressed criminal charges. I could have pushed Agent Chen to have her dragged out of my house in handcuffs for child endangerment. I could have ruined her life the way she tried to ruin mine. But a soldier doesn't waste ammunition on a corpse. I looked at Agent Chen. I kept my voice dead level. I don't want her in a jail cell, I said. I want a permanent, indefinite, no-contact order. Her name is to be completely wiped from every piece of medical, educational, and legal paperwork associated with my son. She does not exist to him, Elena snapped. The last frayed thread of her sanity broke. You can't do that, she shrieked. Spittle flew from her lips. She stepped toward me, her hands balling into fists, completely forgetting that a combat officer was standing 3 feet away. I am his grandmother. You don't have the right. David will never let you get away with this. When my son finds out what you're doing. On the glass coffee table right next to the plastic evidence binder, my cell phone lit up. A heavy digital ringtone cut through Elena's screaming. It was a FaceTime video call. The caller ID flashed bold white letters against the dark screen, David. Elena stopped mid-sentence. She pointed a shaking finger at the phone. Answer it, she hissed. Answer it right now. Let him see what his crazy wife is doing to his mother. I didn't hesitate. I reached down, swiped the green icon, and hit the speakerphone button. The audio connection was thick with static, the heavy electronic interference of a military satellite feed coming from halfway across the world. David's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in a cinder-block bunker in the Middle East, wearing a dirt-stained tan t-shirt, sweat dripping down his temples. Before I could even say his name, Elena leaned over the table. David! She sobbed, forcing fake tears into her eyes, her voice cracking. David, thank God. Your wife has lost her mind. She brought the military here. She's trying to keep me away from the baby. You have to tell them, David. Tell them I was just trying to help. David didn't say a word. He looked through the camera lens. He saw his mother hysterical and red-faced. He saw the cold, furious set of my jaw. And he saw the sharp green uniform of Captain Vance standing in the background. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't play the peacemaker. He didn't ask us to calm down and talk it out. Mom, David said. The satellite feed crackled, but his voice cut through the static like a serrated knife. Get out of my wife's house, right now. Elena froze. The fake tears instantly dried up. David, sweetie, you don't understand. I said get out, David snapped. His voice bounced off the bunker walls, loud and aggressive. I read the CPS report Mira sent me. You locked my kid in a chemical room. You threw away her mother's blanket. You are done. It's my house too, she screamed, her voice cracking. I am your mother. You are a threat to my son. David fired back without missing a single beat. Do not call me again until you hold a certified certificate from a state-mandated parenting class, and hand over the spare key. The line went dead. The electronic beep of the disconnected call echoed in the quiet living room. That was the final blow. The absolute, undeniable severance of the bloodline. Elena's knees buckled slightly. She slumped against the back of the sofa, staring at the black screen of the phone. The one person she thought would always take her side, the son she had manipulated for 30 years, had just publicly executed her authority from 5,000 miles away. The ripple effect was immediate. Bianca, who had been standing by the hallway the entire time, didn't say a single word in her mother's defense. She quietly slung her designer purse over her shoulder. The rubber soles of her shoes squeaked against the laminate floor as she backed away, turning down the hallway and slipping out the back door like a coward. Outside on the front lawn, Martha quickly shoved her smartphone deep into the pocket of her sweatpants. Captain Vance slowly turned his head, locking eyes with her through the front window. Martha didn't wait for him to step outside. She turned around and speed-walked back to her own property, keeping her head down. The audience was gone. The flying monkeys had scattered. Elena stood up. Her hands were shaking violently now. She reached into her cheap leather purse, pulled out the brass spare key, and threw it onto the glass table. It hit the plastic binder with a sharp clatter. She looked at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a toxic, venomous hatred. Even now completely destroyed, she refused to take accountability. She tried to salvage one last pathetic scrap of her pride. "This is my son's house," she muttered, her voice trembling. "You're nothing without him." I stepped away from the table. I walked past Agent Chen. I walked past Captain Vance. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door and pulled it wide open. A cold, bitter gust of North Carolina wind ripped into the living room. I looked Elena dead in the eyes. "This is not your son's house," I said, my voice sharp and cold as a razor blade. "This is our house. Get out." The heavy oak door closed behind Elena. Click. The deadbolt slid into the steel strike plate. The lock was secure. The perimeter was finally clear. Dusk was settling over Fayetteville. The streetlights outside hummed to life, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. I zipped my light field jacket up to my chin and stepped out onto the concrete porch. I didn't call Sarah back over to help. I didn't ask Captain Vance for a detail. A soldier cleans up their own battlefield. I walked down to the curb. The heavy green city trash can was sitting exactly where Elena left it. I reached my hands inside. These were the same hands that had hauled 60-pound rucksacks across the desert, the same hands that had dug firing trenches in the hard-packed dirt of Iraq. I grabbed the broken, splintered wood of the white crib. I pulled each piece out, stacking the jagged slats onto the damp grass. At the bottom of the plastic bin, sitting in a pool of gray chemical sludge, was the wheat-colored wool blanket. I reached down and grabbed the dry corner. I lifted it out. The heavy stench of industrial primer burned my nose. The wool was matted, stiff, and stained. Elena had looked at this and called it trash. She looked at the only thing I had left of the woman who raised me in a rusted Ohio trailer, and she tried to throw it away because it didn't fit her shiny, fake reality. I carried the blanket inside. Later that night, the house was completely silent. The harsh overhead lights in the laundry room cast a yellow glow against the white utility sink. I filled the basin with hot water. I poured in a heavy measure of clear, unscented detergent. I pushed the wool down into the water. I scrubbed. My knuckles scraped against the ribbed plastic washboard. The water instantly turned a murky, toxic gray as the chemical primer bled out of the fibers. I drained the sink. I filled it again. I scrubbed harder. I watched the gray suds swirl down the drain. With every push of my hands, I was washing away Elena's entitlement. I was washing away the years of standing in the corner of my own dining room, eating dry turkey off a plastic folding chair. I was washing away the shame of thinking I wasn't a good enough mother just because I wore combat boots instead of high heels. By the fourth wash, the water ran completely clear. The harsh smell of ammonia was gone. Underneath it, faint but undeniable, was the smell of old yarn and cheap lavender soap, the scent of my mother. History doesn't have to be thrown in a dumpster just because it's dirty. You just have to wash the filth off. I squeezed the heavy water from the wool and hung the blanket over the shower rod to dry. I walked back into the living room. The glass coffee table was wiped clean. I sat down on the sofa and opened the heavy plastic binder. I took the timeline out. I took the pediatric medical clearance out. I took the family care plan out. I stacked them perfectly flush against each other. Then I pulled a new piece of paper from a manila folder on the cushion next to me. It was a freshly printed document from the county courthouse. A permanent state-issued no-contact order. At the bottom right corner, stamped over the black ink of a judge's signature, was a heavy raised red seal. I placed it on top of the stack. I closed the plastic cover. Snap. The fortress was patched. It was stronger now. The weak spots had been identified and permanently sealed off. Midnight. A sharp, biting North Carolina wind whistled through the heavy plastic tarp I had duct-taped over the shattered bedroom windows. The heater was gone. The toxic air was gone. The room was freezing, but it was safe. I sat in the old rocking chair in the corner of the nursery. Leo was asleep in my arms. I had wrapped him tightly in the wheat-colored wool blanket. The yarn was dry now, completely clean, smelling like fresh soap and cold air. His small chest rose and fell in a steady, unbroken rhythm against my collarbone. I looked down at the plastic binder sitting on the floor next to my boots. For years, I hated myself for being cold. I hated that I didn't know how to speak in soft, soothing tones. I hated that I viewed everything as a tactical operation. I thought there was something fundamentally broken inside of me. My mother used knitting needles and cheap yarn to build her love. She wove it together to keep me warm in a freezing trailer. I didn't know how to knit, but I knew how to build a shield. My love wasn't soft. My love was a signed legal document. My love was an ironclad timeline. My love was the discipline to stand completely silent and let the federal government destroy the woman trying to hurt my son. I used steel lockers, military law, and red ink to build a wall that no one could ever breach again. Enemy fire didn't kill me in the desert, and the knives waiting for me in my own house didn't kill me either. I am Mira Rios, a mother, and a sergeant in the United States Army. If you found strength in this story, hit the like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Family Honor Stories. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.